this is going to be an interesting one for comments. Yeah, anyway, number 9 on my list is Final Fantasy. Now, this is a huge series with 12 games, 2 more on the way, loads of side stories, spin-offs, direct sequels, and games that aren't even part of it but were called Final Fantasy anyway. It's one of the most widespread and well-known series, and Square Enix is one of the most well-known and well-respected developers. But this wasn't always the case. Back in the NES days, Squaresoft was probably most known for the racing game Rad Racer and the 3D arcade shooter 3D World Runner. Good games, but not exactly epic in scale or sales. The company was doing so poorly that they seemed they were going to go under, and they put everything they had into an RPG. The name Final Fantasy referred to Squaresoft's own dilemma. This was their last chance. Well, obviously it was a hit, and now they're known as a company that makes almost nothing else but RPGs, for better or worse. Although they were acquired by rival company Enix a few years ago, the Square brand remains to be one of the most associated with the genre. So here we come to the point. As they've released countless epic cinematic adventures, graphical powerhouses, and intricate stories, why do I pick the original Final Fantasy and not any of its sequels that most people consider to be superior? The reason is actually pretty simple. Although most of the Final Fantasy games are good, some of them I would even call great, they do tend to be a bit generic. The characters and stories tend to blend together, where if you showed me a random character from Part 10 or Part 12, I probably wouldn't know which game they're from. And although one of my essential tenets of RPGs is that they be story-driven, it seems to me that Square took it just a little bit too far. The storylines could be epic and grand. Just look at the classic story of Part 4, something everyone knows. Basically, there's 2 reasons why I chose the original Final Fantasy. The first is simply nostalgia. I grew up with this game. Well, here's a story. When I was a kid, we used to rent games, not from Netflix or whatever, but from a video store. The local video store, the way they had the cover set up, was fanned out so that part of the cover was always obscured. So me and my friend used to think that the game was called Final Fanta. We were always trying to rent it. We had no idea what type of game it was, but only from word of mouth we knew that it was awesome. And it was a real bitch to rent because it was always out already. It's one of those games that came with all sorts of shit. The manual was almost like a mini strategy guide, and there were all sorts of maps and enemy charts and shit. Back then you really got a lot of stuff with your game. The second reason why I chose this game is its nature. You can pick any combination of 4 characters out of 6 types. You could have 4 fighters if you wanted, or 2 thieves and 2 mages. It gives a lot of possibility to play the game. Like Ultima, it's like a difficulty setting. Because the story is pretty scantily told and your 4 characters are blank slates, we used to use our imaginations and almost make up our own stories in the Final Fantasy universe. That's what a lot of games are missing these days. They don't stimulate your imagination like they used to. Naming your characters and having them as virtual blank slates was great, because you can imagine them having their own personalities and flaws, and each battle played out more in your head than on the screen. It's things like this that I really miss in some modern RPGs. In the game you play as the Light Warriors, the prophesized bringers of peace and order to a world that has grown chaotic. Your goal is to return light to 4 crystals that represent earth, fire, water, and wind by destroying 4 fiends, beings of pure evil that are bent on bringing chaos to the world. There's a great endgame that involves time travel, a god of chaos, and an epic last dungeon. The game has been on a lot of systems: the NES, the WonderSwan, PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, and PlayStation Portable. Personally, I like the Game Boy Advance version the best, even though it's a little too easy. It does add a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of things that just didn't work properly in the NES version are fixed. Though the PSP version has even more added stuff, and it's harder, and the graphics are really high def, I haven't played it, so I can't comment on it. Well, there you have it. Although the sequels are considered superior by many, and I certainly respect their attention to detail and storytelling, and I also respect how they put RPGs in the spotlight, but to me, nothing beats the simple fun of making up the story in your head, letting the game open a window to your imagination. Between this and the fact that there are so many different ways to play the game, I'll never get sick of it, so that's why it's number 9 on my list.